All right. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar, Laying the Groundwork for Observability. I'm Sam Fell. We have an amazing topic for you today with a bunch of amazing panelists and a speaker that you're going to love. Today's topic is all about building modern applications that provide flexibility and portability can present monitoring challenges if developers don't adopt an instrumentation-first approach. In this session, we're going to explore key practices around adopting open standards, shifting left the activities required for observability, and empowering developers to think about observability earlier in the software delivery lifecycle. As part of this webinar, there are four, Mitch confirmed, $25 gift certificates that we will be giving away to the folks who are attending. So thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it. I'm going to go ahead and ask our speakers and panelists to introduce themselves now. I'm going to start with Colin. Colin, can you introduce yourself, please? You are muted, sir.
Yep, thank you, Sam. My name is Colin Fallwell. I'm Director of Observability for Sumo Logic, where I help customers in their digital transformations, shifting left, and building world-class observability programs.
Awesome. Welcome. Happy to have you here. Mitch Ashley, long time no see. Great to see you again.
Good to be on with you again, Sam. I'm Mitch Ashley, and I lead an analyst firm, Accelerated Strategies Group, and I'm also a managing analyst focused on cybersecurity, DevOps, cloud native type architecture. So right in the wheelhouse of what we're talking about today. Thank you for having me, Sam.
Fantastic. All right, Emily, Jamil, excuse me. I'm looking at the cameras and not at the slide. Jamil, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Thank you. Jamil Mina. I'm Chief Architect with Red Hat, and I specialize in financial services. I joined Red Hat in 2018, and prior to that, I spent about 24 years in a financial services organization, leading transformation initiatives such as event management, DevOps, and so forth.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you here. Thank you so much. Emily, another Red Hatian. Welcome.
Yes. So I work with Jamil, and I'm also a chief architect here at Red Hat. And I've been spending about the last 10 years focused on digital transformation and organizational change through adoption and observability with our clients.
Awesome. A lot of horsepower on this call. Last but not least, Caleb, please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Caleb Haley. I was the CEO and founder of Sensu, recently acquired by Sumo Logic. We have been building a sort of as-code solution for monitoring observability for a long time. So I've been thinking about this shifting left around observability for quite some time. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Yes. And Emily and Caleb were sort of late additions to this because of the horsepower, again, just the cranium skills that they're bringing to this conversation. I'm very excited about it. One other thing I'm going to add before I hand it off to Colin. If you look on the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see a chat window or a little chat button that you can expand into a chat window. I see some of you are putting in where you're from. This, we really want to make that chat. There's no Q&A tab. There's no other thing. Just put, if you have a question for any of the panelists, for any of the speakers, put it in the chat and we'll try and get to it. Or if you have comments, if you've seen things that work, or if you have things that you'd like to share, we would love to hear them. To get you started, make it comfortable, go ahead and type where you're joining us from in the chat. I'm going to do the same thing. San Francisco Bay Area. Hello. All right. And now, Colin, if you are ready, I'm going to pass it off to you. And panelists, if you would care to, you're welcome to turn your cameras off while we're watching Colin do his thing.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, everybody. Today, I just wanted to talk to you guys about observability and really cover some of the foundational principles of observability, and then we'll get into the panelist discussion. Observability is often discussed in terms of the requirements to collect logs, metrics, and traces. We think these types of data are important to enabling operators to understand their systems, but it's clear that simply collecting lots of varied data is really not the end of the story. We're seeing this evolution in the concept of observability that emphasizes asking the right questions of your systems, starting with what aspects of system performance reliability, and business intelligence do I care about? And through that lens, SREs, DevOps teams, and operations staff can identify the appropriate data to track in order to support a level of performance that's really meaningful to the business. Getting there has come with many challenges, particularly when organizations are deploying new technologies or embarking on initiatives such as app modernization. And if development teams don't really examine their approach to monitoring and applying control theory as they adopt cloud-native technologies, they'll likely discover that the traditional tools and approaches really don't support the kind of visibility required in these complex and dynamic environments. Rather than accessing the insight they need, they may end up tracking performance characteristics that aren't relevant to cloud-native technologies, or they simply can't efficiently collect and analyze the data required to understand reliability issues at scale. For example, the process of, say, tracking and defining service level objectives, or SLOs, or the aspect of performance and reliability that your organization really cares about is of increasing interest to forward-thinking organizations embracing the concept of observability. Best practices and open standards are still emerging as the market experiments with what kind of SLOs are effective, as well as what frameworks are most beneficial as far as enabling teams to achieve greater reliability. Since the advent of DevOps, the lines of delineation between developers, operations, and site reliability engineering really have blurred substantially. We're seeing that the domains that modern developers must master are increasing. They're numerous, but one is really becoming foundational to nearly all of them, and that's modern observability. Every organization has built performance monitoring dashboards that provide some amount of visualization and correlation, but they frequently offer very little in the way of full stack, real-time alerting, predictive analysis across systems. Evolving to a more mature and reliable production and pre-production environment really depends on correlating, enriching all of the logs, metrics, and traces generated, particularly time series metrics, such as those generated by new technologies like, well, not really new, Kubernetes, but systems and services, the complexity, the full stack. It also requires faster analysis and more event-driven autonomous operations. So really transitioning from simple and siloed monitoring strategies to more integrated observability solutions can deliver significant advantages to IT ops, DevOps, and line of business teams and the enterprise at large. Just a few of these benefits that we see include improving the overall end user experience by adopting a voice of the customer mindset, attaining higher levels of application health and availability, which ultimately drives really reliability improvement and revenue growth. So as such, many organizations are developing new strategies such as observability-driven development to radically mature reliability objectives for predictable business outcomes. And if you think about it, observability-driven development, or ODD, is really just an extension of the same philosophy or framework of test-driven development, this shift-left motion of defining observability requirements up front. And we see a lot of evidence with leading cloud-native enterprises starting to really expand the scope of observability in this way. For example, they're aligning deployment insights, DORA metrics with higher-level business functions, including cost to serve and transactional requirements that really pull together the full scope of observability, thinking about all of this up front, putting the right telemetry and metrics and microservices to get all of that data out in a contextual way. So let's discuss the principles or the foundation upon which modern observability is built. We talked about control theory just a little bit. It's the idea that you have this behavior of a dynamic system. You want to monitor that over time. And the outputs that system produces becomes a reference variable for really controlling the automation of the control plane. And if you just think about very broadly, if the simple use case of being able to scale systems dynamically in varying load and situations, being able to scale up and scale down, having the right level of observability and the right signals out of your microservices in your environment to be able to make those decisions offloads a lot of demand and load and increases or ensures that customer experience is high and that revenue is always secure. It ensures stability and reliability as that function of feedback. Another area here, though, as far as a foundation, is capability of process, and I don't see a whole lot of organizations, talking about this a whole lot. Capability of process goes all the way back to industrial automation. It's a Six Sigma concept. It's used quite heavily in Six Sigma. And if you think about it this way, capability of process, if you have a high capability of process within the organization, if there's a deviation, I understand without a significant effort what that deviation or what the source of that deviation is. So if I have a high capability of process, I'm not spending a lot of time digging through logs trying to understand what's going on. I understand the deviation. I understand the root cause immediately. I can remediate proactively, and I understand the relationships between all of the output variables in the control theory to the capability that I have within the organization to execute those processes. To really kind of get into that capability process or to achieve high CP, you've really got to undertake and think through in the development lifecycle, what is this process of defining the upper and lower specification limits for metrics or time series data. It's the basis for stability. It's the basis for reliability. And it really lays the foundation for modern, site reliability engineering in terms of defining service level indicators and service level objectives. To have a high capability of process means that my metrics and my data are predictable. I understand for given load scenarios, given situations, given change being introduced in the environment, I know what I expect to see. I have tight corridors within those specification limits, and all of that, both control theory and capability of process really means that I have a system that has high data quality. I've got accurate data. It's complete. It's reliable, and when I have those three elements of observability, what that translates into is an increasing reliance on and confidence in the amount of automation that you can put into the system. So with that, I appreciate this. I look forward to the panel discussion, and I'll turn it back over to you, Sam.
Awesome. Colin, thank you. Panelists, if you want to light up your cameras again. You were true to your word. That was pretty much 10 minutes. I think you nailed it, Colin. Thank you so much for giving the panelists a chance to sort of comment on the things that you've already talked about. So we've gotten a couple questions already. I appreciate seeing everybody active in the chat. The first question that we're going to really pose to our panelists here is we talked about, shifting it left and trying to get this observability baked into your process earlier. What are some of the benefits that you've seen among your clients or the people that you've given some analyst advice to? What are some of the benefits of that for the business? And Emily, you're in front of me here, so I'm going to start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, totally. So at the most basic level, if you're not observing and monitoring your system, then you can't even necessarily see when you failed. So you can't ever really come back from it until a customer tells you. So that's like kind of the most extreme case, but it happens quite often because of the fact that observability and monitoring is not left in the process. It is very far right. I have done many talks on something called the DevOps Maturity Matrix, and people are really far on automation, starting to get into containers or really far into containers, but still way like level 1 status on monitoring and observability. So because of that, they don't actually get to take advantage of the automation and of the container strategy that they've gone forward with, because of the fact that they can't embrace that fail fast mentality of Agile, because they don't even know when they failed, if they failed, and then how they failed.
Right. Yeah. Measure twice, cut once. Right. I mean, they're not measuring any of the things, and they're cutting lots of things. They're doing lots of stuff. So that's really very interesting. Excellent, Emily. Thank you so much. Jamil, another Red Hat perspective. What are you seeing the benefits of shifting that left for businesses? And you are muted. There you go.
Yeah, I'm trying to unmute. Yeah, trying to unmute my phone here. It's interesting because when I think of the business, and I'm going to lean a little bit here on my experience as a banker for 24 years, I think of a profit center. So when it comes to a profit center with where they're responsible for revenue, when I went to implement a large transformational around observability and automation, one of the things I wanted to do is tie into the benefit to the value or availability to be related to revenue. And I could not do that. I could not fit into a profit center from a cost center. That was my challenges in terms of the business. The business wants availability, wants stability, but they will not recognize any additional revenue from stability. So the closer we can figure out how to get the two together to be able to tie in availability to a profit center, the better it is for the business overall.
That's interesting. And the fear of lost revenue, it's not a big enough driver, Jamil?
Is it a fear of lost revenue, or is it here we go, the lack of trust between IT and the business to say you can deliver on the availability for me to assume it and declare it to the street that I'm going to make extra revenue, and then I'm going to be dependent on you for my forecast and revenue to the street. So that's one of the challenges I believe is.
The big challenge. So having that observability is a really big benefit to the business. So that's great, Jamil. Thank you. Caleb, you've helped lots of companies with this. What's some of the business benefits that people are reaping?
I'd say one, I'll try not to repeat what has already been said. There's a lot of overlap there, but one of the benefits we see is, rather than the avoidance of loss, what we see our customers really interested in is how to move faster, right? So ultimately, it all comes down to velocity and being able to compete in their relative markets and whatnot. And it's interesting that Colin was in his presentation talking about observability-driven development. These are like methodologies, practices that can be put in place to help increase velocity. To think about it earlier on in the software delivery lifecycle rather than as a sort of afterthought, oh shoot, we're ready to roll this out into production, and the operations side of the house or the operational concerns sort of then come into view, and you're realizing that you might be flying blind. So having that become part of like the overall like strategic planning earlier in the process, we see that really help our customers to sort of accelerate and increase overall organizational velocity. Nice.
And there's a correlated question from Anshul. I believe I'm saying your name correctly. Apologize if I'm messing it up. At what stage should observability be built in to start reaping the benefits of this? I don't know, Mitch, if you wanted to try and cover that, or actually Caleb, I think that might be a perfect question for you given what Sensu does.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to piggyback on that term that Colin is sort of promoting, I think, in this discussion, this observability-driven development, and, whether you want to have an acronym for this or not. We sort of,
if we did, it would
talk.
be odd.
Yeah. I heard a talk a few years back that said, I wrote this down as a note. I apologize for not having the attribution handy, but not my words, someone else's. If it's important at provisioning time, it's important over time. So, we already think about tests. Colin, you were obviously observability-driven development draws parallels to test-driven development. Where's the intersection between the testing that we do in continuous delivery and the sort of like testing that we do over time in observability, or at least seeing the outputs of our systems and whatnot and learning what we can from them. So, the earlier in the process you can sort of take that into consideration, and like at the same time that you might be developing tests, which is very early in the development life cycle, that's when you ought to be thinking about getting those measurements out of your system.
Excellent. Great questions from the chat. I appreciate it. Mitch, thoughts on the benefits of observability, thoughts on testability, thoughts on when should observability be sort of started? All those topics are on the floor. And you are muted.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Absolutely. I just did a talk last week about, it's not just about shifting left, it's about shifting up. We as an industry have to stop the bad habits we've had for decades of thinking of operations, documentation, testing, all these things that happen at the end. Right now, we have to operate so fast. We can't do those later. They have to be done in very small cycles. So just like we, did all this work to get CI/CD working so that we could, integrate software, deliver software more quickly, we have to do it for the rest of it.
Right.
And the reason why I say it, we sort of had the prevention mentality of, I remember I worked in manufacturing for a while. We knew how many millions of dollars we lost if a production line went down on a GM car production line. Yes, that's true. But how fast, or how can we respond? How can we implement the business strategy and the plan and the agility that the business now requires? It isn't in 3 months we'll decide how it's going, and we'll let sort of the folks that are doing the technology work know if they might need to make a shift or two. They may be contacting you multiple times a day about shifts and adjustments that we need to do, whether it's in these things that we need observability for, or the ability to deliver software. So I think we can help ourselves the best of thinking about instrumenting, just like we instrument software to debug it, instrumenting software to operate it at all levels, at the container level, at the microservice, at the service mesh, at the AI model level. And then what we can be really smart about is, what does that data mean? How do we use it to be more effective? How can we do continuous improvement to help our service grow and operate effectively?
Excellent. I love that. And you sort of touched on the testability and the testing of it. Kasem, I believe I'm saying his name correctly, had a question on that in the chat. Colin, I know that you had some content in the earlier version of your thing around test-driven development. Do you have any thoughts on Kasem's question? Any thoughts on the controllability, whether observability and controllability leads to better testability?
I think it does, and because as a function of testing, and there's so many paradigms in test-driven development. It won't cover it here, but as you get into observability, when you think up front, and somebody else asked, at what stage do you start? I think you start at stage 0. You start at iteration 0. You have to think about the entire value stream of an organization. Why are we doing development? Fundamentally, we're developing software. It's part of a value stream. It's going to be either saving money or generating money for an organization. And that's why we do software development, and everybody's a software development company these days. So as we think about control, whether it's microservices at scale, it's release markers, it's feature markers, it's introducing features, it's doing A/B testing. All of that data can be drawn out as tags and attributes, and pivoted and dimensionalized and analyzed with modern AI and machine learning.
Made actionable. Yeah.
It's very actionable then, right? So you can make command decisions very quickly. And what is this all about? I mean, observability and testability is all about accelerating innovation of an organization, and leading organizations that are dominating the markets that they play in are innovating at faster and faster pace over time. And so to be competitive in the market, you have to really look at observability, testability, and all of this really as a measure of the innovation potential of an organization. How quickly can you go from hypothesis to answering that in production with real customer insight, and that's of high importance to the business, not just IT or operations domains. Now it's product, it's lines of business, it's the enterprise. And the benefit, I think overall of this is that it gets everybody speaking the really along the same language when you start early on. You're thinking about this up front. What are the things that I need to know out of the software before I deploy it into production? And how am I going to measure that? And how am I going to standardize that measurement?
A line around it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was
How
on
am I
a call
going to
earlier today where they
standardize
said, yeah,
Right.
we have all this stuff is done, but we just don't have alignment yet. I'm like, oh,
Yeah,
just alignment. That's the only thing we're missing. Okay, great.
Just alignment. Yeah. But building that standardization and enablement within the development organization across development teams, and sometimes that can be challenging, especially if you've got a lot of that work being outsourced or contracted. But having those standards in place, the frameworks, the libraries, and being able to get down to the point, right? Tactically, I need to be able to go and instrument my code with 2 lines of code and get the telemetry out that I need.
Right.
Standardize that process and know what information I need out of the system, and know going in what are the kinds of questions. Which means that really to start on that, right? You have to, in order to get the benefit of observability to the business, you've got to go to the business and figure out what are the questions that they can't answer today that they need answers to, and then you've got to go and codify that into your program.
Nice. So there's obviously a lot of benefits for the overall business. Let's drill down one level. And for the individuals with the hands on the keyboards, right? What are some of the benefits of observability that a developer would sort of take away? And this time I'm going to start with you, Mitch.
Well, I think in a real practical sense, when we need to engage in a developer, because not everybody is having developers do all ops, right? Most people aren't. Is often the first thing is, well, not just what the problem is, where is the problem? What information, what data do I need to go figure that out? In a complex world where we're dealing with lots of small things, microservices, containers, etc.
Thousands of them, in fact.
Thousands of them. Yeah, I mean, it could be tens of hundreds of thousands of them. Like, where do you look? How do you find that thing? You may need a microservices catalog to help you at least point to where. And that's where tracing work and things like that come in. So I think the days of handing the developer, here's 20 logs, go figure it out. We have to get very quickly to, here's the 3 things we immediately know that are relevant to this problem, or we believe it is, as a great starting point. And here's tools to get the rest that you need. And we'll work right alongside you to diagnose that, because we're experts at understanding what those things are too, from our standpoint. So I think just at a real practical level, we can't do it the way we did it 5 years ago. This is a new world. We have to have an automation mindset about how we triage and operate, not just automation, how we create software.
So Caleb, you're next, and that's a perfect segue. Tell me a little bit about observability and developers and automation and pipelines and all that good stuff.
I'd love to chime in, but perhaps I'll defer to Emily first, and then I'll follow up there.
Great. All right, Emily.
Okay, so there are so many benefits to developers, but I will try to only focus on one to not be too overwhelming. And the biggest thing that I see is change failure rate. So if you don't have the observability as a developer to see why your changes take so long to get into production, and then also how to make your code better so that then it's not just continually getting shot back to you, that's a bunch of wasted time that no one wants to deal with. And so that observability of being able to see actually the full pipeline, so not only the issues that you run into, but the issues that your QA team, that your security teams, because everyone still has those to some respect. Now, very few companies have the full life cycle owned by developers, as Mitch was saying. And so being able to see, hey, how can I actually help get this into production faster by paying attention to these other issues that come up for the other teams? Like, it is my problem now, because now I'm wasting 3 weeks of my life when I could have put this into production within an hour. And I actually had a team that helps support a healthcare company go from, it took about 3 to 6 weeks to get, let's say, even a website color change into production, to being able to get it down to 1 hour. but we had to go through and do actual sticky note exercises of value stream mapping and other open practices, design thinking practices that took about 6 weeks to finally get them through, so that then they could see, okay, where are we wasting most of our time, to be able to get something as simple as a color change into production. So we were able to actually address that. But the next step is really making sure that your systems can do that without you having to go through that every 3 months because something degrades within the system. And that's really where observability can help developers.
Yeah, I think Caleb made a great point earlier. If it's important enough to create, then it's important enough to monitor over time. I didn't say it the right way, but that was sort of the general idea that I took away from it. So that's great. Thank you, Emily. All right, who would like to go next? I'm not going to call on Caleb because I don't want him to not want to speak next. So.
I'll chime in. I'll chime in.
Right,
You want to go, Caleb?
Go for it.
Yeah. I wanted to hear from Emily, and I'm glad we did. I agree with basically everything that she just said. I think, the way we've thought about this at Sensu for a long time is, raise your hand if you've given a presentation to an audience that included engineers, developers, whether they be, on the application or service side of the house or the operation side of the house. And at the end, they're like, cool, where's the code? And, so like that is one of the things that I think about. We've been thinking about monitoring as code or observability as code for some time. And, being able to, this sort of like spans developer benefits and organizational benefits. It's like with traditional tooling, if I have achieved some success with a tool that we've onboarded into the organization, and you are walking by my desk and you're like, oh, wow, you solved this problem. We have this problem in our team over here as well. How'd you do it? And I'd say with traditional tools, well, you go through this training, then you get the thing set up, and then, sometime later you can have the same success, which we've had. Versus with as code tools, you say, well, we've already done all that work, so here you can just copy this template and boom, deploy it into your environment, right? Yeah, exactly. So, when in a small organization, there's cost savings there, but in a large organization, it's tremendous cost and time savings. It's sort of like it gets magnified. The more teams there are to share these solutions with. There's both organizational and developer benefits there. Show me the code, right?
yeah, making it more declarative. I love that. Awesome.
I'd like to just chime in on that to Caleb's point, in that if you think about it, right, traditionally, observability go back prior to modern observability, APM is a bolt-on technology that was largely ops driven and was outside of this feedback loop within the developer ecosystem. It wasn't integrated into the CI/CD pipeline. Oftentimes, in the attempt to make things predictive with APM, it fell short because there's no science behind, what are we going to measure? Well, some philosophies, let's just monitor everything. We'll just bring in everything. Well, then it's just data overload. It's just an avalanche of data, and you're still combing through everything, trying to figure out when something goes wrong. And versus, maybe missing something, not having what you need, and then you have to go back after the fact and say, okay, well, we need to change the level of instrumentation so that we can get more information. We've got to, push code out again 3 or 4 times to fix logging so that we can get more information out of it because we didn't have the reflection of the instrumentation done right. I
just thought of like the killer observability product. I don't know who can build it, but it's a time machine.
Right.
To be able to go back in time and get the stuff you didn't get originally. That would be like perfect.
That's it. And so, so now bringing all of this in, especially as infrastructure as code, now we go observability as code. You are developing these standards and these processes within the developer life cycle. You're bringing that information back in either through annotation or back directly into the developer workflow. So that as something goes through the pipeline into production, into, say, a canary, I think it's really changing. What I see changing most dramatically in the developer workflow is that it's becoming more, you push something that's brand new out, and you're able to get the information back, and you're building confidence slowly, and you're making it more available, that feature more and more available. It's really changing from kind of the blue, green, and canary into this, like, now my test environment actually can be production. And I can introduce this to one or two customers on demand with the feature switch, and I can get feedback instantly, and I can look how the code is operating. I can see how efficient it is, and I can see what kind of load it's producing, in a limited scale environment. And if I don't like it, I can pull it back, and I can transform it and change it and push it back through. That's the benefit of having all of this, as code.
Yeah, excellent. Very good. I don't think we've heard from Jamil yet. Jamil, thoughts on this? Any of it?
I don't know what else I can add, but I'm gonna take a spin on it in terms of my experience with the developer experience. So the color of this is we used to have incidents. Financial services are all online, and we make money for being available to the customers. And some systems, basically the bank's charter depends on them being available. So they are so critical from a consumer perspective. And we used to have these major incidents where we bring the whole organization together, and we create something called the Fire ID, to provide the developers the ability to see the event, to be able to look into the code, to be able to see what's going on with the JVM, and to be able to troubleshoot it, because no one in the operation knows what's going on inside of that JVM. So now take that and elevate that complexity even more with the microservices on a container platform, like OpenShift. So now operations cannot see inside of the system as well. So they can't change any of the parameters because everything has to be shifted left. So the way the transformation worked for us is we shifted left to the developer in terms of instrumentation, in terms of visibility, into creating the right security practices around giving the developers the ability to see what's going on in production without having elevated privileges in production. So that was essential in order to accelerate stability, because now developers that are designing and developing applications, and between quote designing, because there are multiple roles that do different responsibilities, they are the ones that are the subject matter experts in terms of how the applications work. And they are the one that knows 5 seconds is 5 seconds. And if my 5-second response does not come in 5 seconds, it means I'm in a degraded situation. So no one knows more than them what's going on within the application. So shifting that left is important. And there was a comment earlier, a question around, should we create a separate role for observability? And I lived that. I had a group that does nothing but instrument applications, and the quality was not great. So shifting left is the key. I think I'm repeating everything that Colin, Mitch, Caleb, and Emily said. Go back to the developers, give them the power, give them the ability. And that's why today the modern platforms that we're building, like what Red Hat builds and what Sumo builds, is now you can provision and consume the capabilities that the developers need right on that fingerprint to be able to design the observability, to be able to deliver good quality application.
Nice. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add to that, or shall we move on to the next topic? The next topic happens to be benefits of observability for operations. We can cover that one. We have about 15 minutes left. There's also a question on how do I get started? That might be another question that we want to try and talk to. Or how does AI/ML fit in? And so I'm going to give the speakers, because we probably have time for one more question. So I'm going to give the speakers a choice. Which question would you like to answer? And I'm not going to start with Caleb. I'll start with Jamil, if that's okay. So Jamil, which question would you like to respond to? Benefits of observability for operations. This is like what's that game show? How do I get started with observability, or AI/ML for 500?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Both are near and dear to my heart. But I'm going to go with the operations because we talked about the business and the developers, and it's not through this DevOps without talking about,
Great.
about the operations.
Love it.
So operations, obviously, with the new paradigm of shifting left toward the developers, they always ask the question is, what is my new role? I used to firefight. I used to monitor. I used to fix a system. So my role has changed in a kind of a DevOps and SRE organization. So what is my new purpose in life? Do I go break it so I can go firefight it? No, that's not the right answer. So now it's all in the benefit of the business. We're doing all of this stuff to generate more revenue and create more economical value for an organization. Therefore, we have a set of metrics, and this is where SRE comes into play that Colin mentioned earlier during his presentation, where we have a set of standards to collaborate between the business and between the business, the development, and the operations team to create these service level objectives that create collaborations between operations teams and the development team. So if you think of SRE a little bit, then it's split. It's not the account admin that I relabel as SRE and tell them now you're delivering as code. The responsibility of reliability is split between the app dev team and the operations team. And they will have a set of objectives between the two and metrics that they can live within that budget to maintain reliably the infrastructure and reliably the applications and work toward that collaborative responsibility. So the developers move up. I think Mitch, you mentioned moving up, move up into the stack around the application, and operations focus on providing platforms and infrastructure underneath them that are reliable with a common set of service level objectives between the two to collaborate around.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. I love that you're covering the operation side because it is really, really important. And so there was another excellent question in the chat. I think Mitch is eager to jump on it. So Mitch, I'm going to ask you to answer that question.
Yeah, security. I was like, this is an awesome question. And it demonstrates why these things are not vertical stovepipe things. One of the things we've all heard about supply chain attacks, and I'm going to pick on certain people for whatever. Our development pipeline is prime for being attacked and compromising. If you're in the place where you create the software, what better place to be, whether it's your software or coming from a third-party supplier. So it's just like we used to think about security as a get in, shift over to the directory. Now you've got credentials to everything. Think about all the rich information that's available and all the data that we have and logs, et cetera, and everything. It's also a place where an attacker, when you've been compromised, will go just like, if you compromised a one computer, you'll go in and modify the logs and mask the fact that you're there. That's happening within our software chains now. So security is critical to the supply chain and the trust chain of our software. So that has to be one of the major factors we think about for the entire tool chain, and also, of course, the observability, because it's seeing things all the way across that process.
PCI data, HIPAA data, all this stuff, all these logs have a lot of information in it. And so to your point, right, having an observability system that's able to collect that information for you, but then store it in a PCI, FedRAMP, right? All of these, the HIPAA, all of these different things that you need to be worried about with this private data. If you're managing that yourself, then you have to be really good at managing that yourself. And there are a lot of people that can do that.
And you have to audit it too.
But you have to, it's really, because you're pulling together all of this information, and to Mitch's point, if a bad actor gets in, instead of looking around at all the systems, just go to to your big database of observability data, and you probably got access to a lot of stuff.
I was just going to say the same thing as Mitch about auditing. Like, security should be interested in observability for two reasons. One, to sort of audit and ensure that you're not leaking this sort of sensitive data. And then once they ensure that you're not leaking that data, then they should be interested in the observability as sort of like one of the proofs that you are correctly protecting that sensitive data, right? So that there's the auditability is sort of twofold, and certainly makes sense for them to collaborate around these observability initiatives.
Spot on.
Great. I love it. I love the questions coming in from the chat. Folks, keep it going. All right. So Caleb, you were just speaking about the security thing. Are there any of these other topics that you want to cover? You want me to defer to somebody else first and come back to you?
I'll just speak briefly on there were some good questions that were asked and answered in the chat.
Great.
And Emily and I were both over there in the chat. But I want to go back to something that you commented on in the chat, Sam, and that I feel like I heard Jamil saying when he chose observability operations for 500, that which is automation. And I think that there is a sort of inherent link between observing failures, and operations concern is to keep things up and running. And the way that they approach keeping things up and running is by automation. I think it was, Emily, your comment about maturity models and how the automation maturity model is really off the charts. There's like so much focus on that. But then day two, after we have deployed the thing, and now we are operating it, that maturity model is not so good.
Yeah.
And if you can, exactly. And if you can sort of connect those dots and say, hey, we can get a twofer on all of this automation that we have in place. If we can link some observability to this automation that we have, we can use that observability to go and poke the automation and say, hey, bring this system back into the desired state, right? So that's sort of one of the benefits we think about at Sensu and around automated remediation workflows and things like that. Tons and tons of value there. I'll just stop there.
Nice. All right, well, that's great. Okay, Colin or Emily? Colin, let's go to you. Colin, which one do you want to tackle here?
I'll jump into operations just briefly. I think one of the other benefits to ops is that it's no longer a guessing game. Operations are not the subject matter experts on the code. And for a long time, operations has tried to implement transaction tracing and try to understand, transaction tracing and the flow of transactions through systems, and understand null pointer exceptions and exceptions that are being thrown in code. And it's always a guessing game. If you're an operator, it's a guessing game. Like, well, is that a critical thing or is that not? And you're often flipping the count of errors upside down, and you're just looking at the things that only happen a few times a day, and you're overlooking the things that happen millions of times a day because you're trying to figure out from an outlier perspective what's going on. I think observability, when you bring developers in and you're now creating this synergy between developers and operations and the business to understand, what does it mean to have observability? And the operators are no longer the ones trying to figure out what's going on, and they're far more efficient at being able to understand that the upper and lower specification limits are being now moved into something that represents code in the pipeline. And so if I can set my variables and I can say that here are the upper and lower specification limits, I'm not leaving it up to somebody in operations to guess or try to figure out based on look back or just looking at trends and trying to figure out, is that good or not, so I can get this high confidence in green states so that I can build automation. It's all coming through the system and the pipeline.
Yeah, excellent. Jamil, you had raised your hand. You have something you wanted to add? And then Emily, I'm going to go to you.
No, that was a mistake. I was going to say congratulations to Colin for 25 years of writing a paper ago, and it didn't come up as a clapping hand. It came as a raising hand.
Oh, got it.
I apologize for that.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, Kassem mentioned that he wrote a paper on this 25 years ago. So it's not new control theory. And the idea of observability, just the attention that it's getting now is because the systems that we have are getting so out of control. We absolutely need it. Emily, your thoughts?
Yes. I'm going to kind of piggyback on a few different things. And the first thing is the security piece, where observability is extremely important for security. And in the past, I would say people were just kind of interested in security through obfuscation, kind of the same thing of, oh, I need 5 nines of uptime, so I have it. And if you don't actually monitor appropriately, then you do. And so it's this, it's not that it's not happening. It's not that the hacks aren't happening. It's not that the downtime isn't happening, just you could hide it before. And so that's why in terms of getting started with observability, it's really about setting appropriate KPIs to allow people to actually be public about the things that are going wrong in the system, so that then all of the best minds in the company can come together and figure out, okay, how do we actually make this system better? How do we make it more secure? How do we make it more resilient? And that's really what is important, is allowing that safety for people to kind of open up their systems in their organization, not totally publicly, but allowing people to kind of show where there are problems, and because of the fact that software has been managed so with a hammer for so long, that is still relatively new to the industry in terms of being open and having that psychological safety. And so if you don't have an organization that encourages that, you're never going to truly have an observable system.
I think I love that. And I think that the whole idea of with DevOps and making the psychological safety and getting people comfortable with experimentation and knowing that not everything is going to be a slam dunk. But if you're experimenting, guess what? You need to track the results. And how do you do that? Right? Metrics, data, telemetry. So that's great. I love that. Okay. There was another question up above that I think we'll end on. Somebody asked about, let's see, where's the question? And Caleb and Emily talked about it. Who in the group should sort of be focusing on observability, and how do I get started with it? And so I think everybody was in violent agreement, but I think it might be worth just talking through it. I don't know if Emily or Caleb, you wanted to bring that up at all. Maybe Emily, I'll ask you to start.
You want to take it, Emily? I think we were on the same page.
Yes, we were, which is observability is important for every team. So Caleb had the idea of there being one person on the team ultimately responsible for observability. And I've also seen where every single person is in charge of observability in their own right, which, requires a lot of cross-functionalism. So I agree with both, as long as observability is a team-centric approach, not just this organizational top-down.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't have empowerment of the teams to say, hey, this is actually what's important, you're never really going to have an observable system.
Would it be safe to say, so people talk a lot about from project to product, and you have product teams where you've got architects and developers and operations people and experienced people and observability people, testing people, right? Observability, should we have an observability person on those product teams? Is that what we're saying, Caleb?
I think if you look at it like a responsibility matrix, greater than 0 people per team should be responsible for observability, right? Whether that number is 1% or 100% of the team, like someone needs to be responsible. It cannot be a responsible party outside of an individual app or product or service team who has that responsibility. So that's where I think Emily and I were sort of in agreement.
Nice. Because, a lot of that outside, you're trying to do it from the outside. That was the point that Colin had made earlier about operations trying to get APM to work. It's just like, okay, there's this black box. How do I start to pry it open and inject all the stuff that I need? But there's a better way. Somebody was going to say something. I interrupted.
I was just going to chime in on that. Is that consider starting start a governance board within the organization. Start lean. Start with asking the question, what's important? What are the questions that we need answers to? and what's important to the different stakeholders in the business across the lines of business, IT, finance, ops, development, product, and then write those down and then define what are going to be the standard processes by which we answer those questions, and we get that information in real time out of the systems. And a governance board is great because then you've got executive buy-in, you've got exec oversight and sponsorship to go and execute these programs and to put funding where it needs to be in order to do the digital transformation within the organization around observability. Agreed. 5 minutes left. Anybody else have any thoughts on this topic? I realize I just...
If I could jump in, one thing I wanted to piggyback on Colin, and I like that you bring that perspective and you bring us back to that is with all the things that we do in the software process, there's a purpose, there's a reason that's outside of us as a team, as an organization. It's some business driver. It's creating some value for the business, for customers, for us to be able to get into a new market, take more market share, deliver new product, whatever that is. And what I would say is don't be afraid of what the business goals are. To Colin's idea, go take the CPO out to lunch with a team of you and say, we really want to hear what the strategy is from you. And because guess what? They love to talk about what their work is, just like you do. So go learn from the business and really understand, well, what does that strategy mean? They'll be they'll be thrilled to share that with you. And that way, as we implement tools and processes and metrics and all of these things, you can align them in some way, maybe a line of sight, maybe it's not directly, but that'll help you know as you make decisions, because now you're using metrics that not only affect you internally, but have some influence on an outcome that's super important to customers, employees, in the business.
Very good. Yeah, I believe Kassem just put his the title of his paper. I did a quick Google search for it, Kassem, and I believe I found the correct IEE document. If anybody's interested in reading a 25-year-old paper on this topic, I'm sure we could all learn something from it. I certainly have learned something today. We're almost at time, so I'm going to take this opportunity to thank all of our panelists from Red Hat, from Sumo Logic, from Accelerated Strategies. Thank you, Colin, for putting the primer together. And most of all, thank you, audience. Google, Kassem. Google's got it all, right? It's not me, believe me. I want to thank the audience for engaging with us, asking us questions, and participating in this. I've had a lot of fun, and I've learned a bunch. If anyone else has anything to say, otherwise, I'll just say thank you.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, everyone.
For moderating. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.